Welcome to the Truth Seekers class presentation on Honor Your Father and Mother. In the last lesson, we talked about the third and fourth of the Ten Commandments, which were honoring God. This week, we will be discussing the fifth commandment, which is to honor your parents. There will be an example story of Absalom concerning the fifth commandment. How did Absalom demonstrate his faith in God? Was David aware of Absalom's spiritual condition? Who was Ahithophel, and why did he support Absalom? Why did Absalom go to Hebron? This is the overview of this week's lesson according to the quarterly guide. Exodus 20:12, fifth commandment, honor the parents God has placed in your life. 2 Samuel 15, verses 7 to 12. Honor acts with truthfulness and integrity toward parents. 2 Samuel 15, verses 13 to 14. Honor seeks the welfare of parents. Now we begin the first section, which is honor the parents God has placed in your life. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. In the Ten Commandments it says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth you. Ephesians 6:2 goes along with this. It says, honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. What is the promise? That you live a long life. In Mark chapter 7, verse 10 and 11, Jesus says to the Pharisees, for Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whosoever curseth father or mother, let him die the death. He was quoting Exodus 21, verse 17. He went on to say, but you say, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is Corban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever you might be profited by me, he shall be free. Well, Corban, either starting with the C or the K, was a gift dedicated to the temple. Apparently, if something was declared as Corban, it could not be used for something else, like parents. But the offenders were using it for their own pleasure. So they didn't use it on their parents to honor them, but they used it for themselves. They were disobeying the fifth commandment, and they thought they were getting away with it. We now come to the second section of our lesson, and it is 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 7 through 12. Honor acts with truthfulness and integrity toward parents. Do you remember this picture from the children's Sunday school years ago? This is Absalom. He was riding on a mule trying to get away, and his hair got caught in a tree, and he was suspended in air, and then he was killed. Absalom was the third son of David. The Bible said he was very handsome. His oldest brother Amnon had raped his half-sister Tamar, and Absalom was angry. He stewed for 2 years, and David had done nothing about it either. So Absalom had Amnon murdered. And after he murdered him, he fled to Geshur, which was where his grandpa was king. David allowed Absalom back into Jerusalem, but never let Absalom see him, and this went on for 2 years. So Absalom, getting a little impatient, went to his next door neighbor, who was his cousin, and set his fields on fire, and this was Joab. And if you know who Joab was, he was a very powerful and a very vicious person at times. But Absalom manipulated Joab. So here's a map of Israel and the surrounding area during the times of Absalom. You can see Jerusalem is kind of in the lower middle of the map, highlighted in yellow, and above it is highlighted in yellow as well as Geshur, which is where Absalom went to, where his grandfather was king. So the first verse, 2 Samuel 15:7. When 4 years had passed, King James actually says 40 years, but it had to be 4 years. Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron to fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. So Absalom asked his dad, said, I need to fulfill a vow. Well, vows had to be performed very quickly, according to Deuteronomy 23:21. And this had been 4 years. It took Absalom a little bit too long to do his vow. That should have made David suspicious. The next verse, 2 Samuel 15:8 says, For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, If the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Those words were beautiful words to a religious parent's ears. He was going to make a vow to the Lord, and he would serve the Lord. Baptist parents often are deceived by words from their children as well, and that is not showing honor to parents when one does that. The next verse, 2 Samuel 15:9, says, Go in peace, the king, that's David, said to him. So he, that's Absalom, went to Hebron. So why did Absalom go to Hebron? Hebron is 20 miles south of Jerusalem and was the previous capital of Israel and the place David was made king. Absalom could legitimize his attempt to the throne, for after all, his father had been made king there. Hebron was also a fortified walled city, a good place to defend yourself when you're attempting to become king. David was oblivious to Absalom's plot. Here's the map we showed before, and the bottom highlighted area is the city of Hebron, which is about 20 miles south of Jerusalem. How could this happen? How could David not even question his son? We as parents sometimes overlook cues from our children. Children say they will follow the Lord, but being raised in church, they learn and know the right words to use. Maybe some of us have done this with our parents in the past. David was probably pleased his son was going to worship God. Wouldn't you? Maybe David also felt guilty over his past and was afraid to question anything. The next verse, 2 Samuel 15:10, says, Then Absalom sent agents or spies throughout the tribes of Israel with this message. When you hear the sound of the ram's horn, you are to say, Absalom has become king in Hebron. The ram's horn, or the shofar, sounding is a call to arms and was also used at royal coronations. His followers were to start a chant that the rest would pick up on. Sound familiar? You've heard of no justice, no peace. The next verse, verse 11, says 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom. They had been invited and were going innocently, for they did not know the whole situation. So 200 innocent governmental leaders, advisors of David, were held hostage by Absalom. David would be without his valuable people. The next verse, verse 12, says, And Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city, even from Gilo, even while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. Why did Ahithophel betray David? He may have been the grandfather of Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 3:24 says that Eliam was a son of Ahithophel, and 2 Samuel 11:3 says that Bathsheba was a daughter of Eliam. If Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather, he may have resented David for murdering his grandson-in-law Uriah. We don't know that, but that's very possible. Offering sacrifices was part of the ceremony of crowning a new king. Ahithophel betraying David signaled the complete break with David by Absalom. The last section of this lesson is found in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 13 and 14. Honor seeks the welfare of parents. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 13, it says, And there came a messenger to David saying, The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. David, Absalom's father, was the last to learn of this. Can you imagine the feeling of David's betrayal, being betrayed by his own son? In verse 14, David said to all of the servants with him in Jerusalem, Get up, we have to flee, or we will not escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, or he will overtake us quickly, heap disaster on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. David ran away. Why? He wasn't a coward. Maybe David was questioning his own parenting. He had disobeyed God by marrying multiple wives and marrying some from other countries. He had committed adultery and murder with Bathsheba. He let Amnon get away with raping his daughter. His son raped his own daughter and he didn't do anything for it. Why? Maybe he felt guilty. Yes, God will forgive our sins when we confess, but we must sometimes suffer the consequences of our sins. Not within our lesson is what happened a little later when Absalom totally dishonored his father. Ahithophel advised Absalom again, and Absalom took David's concubines to the roof so that all Israel could watch him lay with him. It was a statement of total dishonor to not only his father, but to God, whose commandment spelled out this act as a despicable sin. This lesson on Absalom is an example of how not to honor your parents. Siding with majority may have been a bad decision for those who jumped on Absalom's bandwagon as well. And many youngsters today are making bad decisions on who to side with. We should honor our parents. That's who we should side with.